Are you curious about financial literacy? Then take a look at Professor Anthony Rivecchio's new program on Parrot TV. It's called Financial Focus University. This is an excellent program to learn about questions related to your own finances post-COVID, if how you can manage your money, how you can work with your tax situation. And this is an excellent and informative discussion of financial literacy. With Professor Anthony Rivecchio, your financial problems will be solved at Parrot TV with Financial Focus University. Welcome to the Foreign Policy Review, and I am Dustin Pickering. This is a Parrot TV program. Thanks for joining us, all our viewers today. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Today's guest is Ian Kummer. He's in Moscow, suburban Moscow. And we have our co-host, CARLO Parcelli and Billy Bob with us today. And I'm just going to get us kicked off here. We're talking about Ukraine and the, some of the public image in Moscow, what they're thinking of Putin and so forth from the streets. So let's kick it off to Ian and let him introduce himself a little bit and tell us a little bit about yourself, your blog, where we can find it, and what your just introduce yourself.
All right. Well, thanks for having me here. I am from the United States, and I'm a blogger who is currently visiting Russia. I'm in the suburbs outside Moscow, and this is my third trip to Russia. I first came here December of last year. I didn't really originally have any kind of, political aspects to what I was talking about. I was just traveling, and Russia sparked my interest. Russian people sparked my interest. Russian culture sparked my interest. And I have a blog, readingjunkie.com, where I post just my commentaries and stories, and a little bit about my background. So I was in the military. I got out last year, 14 years total. I was in the Marine Corps first, active duty, in artillery, a fire support man. And then after that, I got out, then I came back in, this time as a public affairs specialist in first the National Guard and then the Army Reserve. And I did that for an additional 10 years. So that gave me some perspective on military life, just how, especially in information, I would say information management, information operations is what I have the most experience in. And so when I give commentary on what I see happening in front of me and what's happening in current events, that's what I keep my focus on. I try not to go outside my lane, go into territory I'm not an expert in.
Well, Ian, I didn't know you were in the military. That's very interesting. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective. I didn't know you had a military background. Again, interesting. So I did read a couple of your articles at Reading Junkie. I remember posting on Facebook about one in particular, which was you had some fact checkers. I don't know if this was the platform Reading Junkie itself that sent the fact checkers, but they were really concerned that you were being a little pro-Russia in your commentary, and they were looking, it seems like, for an excuse to kick you off the platform, it seemed. Can you share a little bit about that? And I would recommend anybody interested in Ian's response to these fact checkers to read the article, because it was a real terrific response. But you want to just tell us a little about that episode and how it resolved?
Well, so about the platform itself. So I have a blog. I own the domain. It's a WordPress site.
WordPress, okay.
I pay for a server, and I won't cite the company here because it's not necessary. But essentially, the Biden administration, the DOD under the Biden administration, this is a fairly new. Trump didn't do this, Obama didn't do this. This is a Biden idea. They basically employed with taxpayer funds, a public contract with this group called News Guards. They're registered as a nonprofit, and what they do is, and they have a very military focus. So they have a specific contract with the DoD to identify disinformation, and so that's all they do. And they're funded by the government, by us, to do this. And as far as I could tell in my research, what this group does is they work with advertisers. So essentially they identify people, then presumably on the back end, they work with advertisers to cut their source of revenue. Doesn't matter for me because I have a buy me a coffee link. I don't rely on advertisers for revenue, so it doesn't affect me. But of course, when they start because they have harassed, especially right-leaning outlets, but really any outlets that strays from that center-right place on the spectrum where Biden's at. They really they've gone after Fox News. They've gone after a few, actually on both the left and the right. They've gone after a few outlets and basically harassed them into following our standards for disinformation. And of course, with the Russia-Ukraine situation, they have a whole team of people focused on that specifically. So I was a little surprised that a little random blogger, got contacted by this person kind of accusing me of spreading, Kremlin propaganda. I was very surprised by that. I basically stopped talking to them eventually, but it is very interesting. I am labeled as Russian disinformation, which is a little disconcerting, to say the least.
It's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible that you have a government-funded program to do this.
So, what were they? I mean, did they threaten you, or did they try and? I mean, so they contacted you. I imagine they were thinking that they could somehow censor you if you didn't respond, if you didn't have a credible response to their accusations, or like what was their what would? I imagine they were trying to censor you and they weren't able to. Is that just because you don't have advertisers? Is that why they weren't able to cut your blog off from WordPress?
Well, it doesn't look like they actually go that far. Didn't happen to me, and I've not actually heard of them doing that to anyone. I mean, they could. It might just be a very preliminary phase to it. They might just be at this, and this is something I kind of speculated on when I wrote about it on the blog. They might just be compiling these lists of people for action later.
Alternatively, I just realized that they probably just want to be able to justify slapping that label of Russian disinformation. So you're probably on a list, and yeah, like you said, maybe later they're going to go to that list and start, whatever kind of censorship they could do. But it might just be putting you on the list, and if you ever, get a bigger platform, they can just remind everybody that, oh, you're a Russian bot, you're a spy.
Yes.
That's just so preposterous, but it's very interesting. The links they're going to, in this new Cold War, which is really, beginning to heat up. So, this morning, I'm not sure if anyone watching is aware just yet because it's relatively breaking news, but Imran Khan has kind of been upfront about choosing sides in this new Cold War, and he's been upfront about aligning against the West and not being the slave of the West as the West insists Pakistan is being. And so he was shot in the leg in an assassination attempt. So that seems like a little bit of an escalation in this growing Cold War, where it's the West trying to maintain their hegemony against a rising Russia and China. And of course, Ukraine is the biggest hotspot. Taiwan is likely to be kicking off within a year or so, quite possibly. Now, your most recent article, Ian, I think it was your most recent. It was your most recent as of last night. Was about ramping up a little bit of the economic war against China. You mentioned that and I didn't see links, but I trust you as a source. If you're a Russian disinformation, I trust you. So just let me say that. If you're given that label, to me, that's a plus. That's a badge of honor. So I trust that when you wrote about this new legislation that the United States has passed threatening U.S. citizens who are working in China in various industries like AI, artificial intelligence. I think also in chip production, that these U.S. Citizens working in China in these industries are being threatened that they have to quit their job or they might lose their U.S. citizenship. So that was your most recent article, and I found it very interesting, again, to say the least. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, where you had read that, and the implications of U.S. citizens being threatened with losing citizenship if they don't quit their job from a private company that is in a country that we're not at war with and who's our biggest trading partner? Like, what does that mean? Because that means a lot. I mean, I think. But let me let you talk about your most recent article and the sources for it, if you could.
Well, this was in the news, so it's and I did have links in that post itself, some hyperlinks. So it's a publicly acknowledged and discussed fact. And from what I can tell, there was no. I want to say, add that disclaimer. To my knowledge, there is no legislative basis for it, and by that I mean this was entirely an executive action.
Okay, important. Thank you.
Yes. It's an executive, as far as I can tell, it's entirely an executive action. Essentially, the Biden administration basically informing all these people in key industries. It looks like AI development and bit in their in the chip production as well. Stating to these people that if you continue your Chinese employment, if you are a green card holder, you're at risk of losing your green card, and if you're a U.S. citizen, you're actually at risk of losing your citizenship. And I think that's kind of an amazing step. It sounds almost unprecedented, and I can't even think of another precedent for that, for where that's been done before, because this isn't, I can't even I don't think we've even done that with our enemies before. We did in World War II when we, in 1941, declaration of war with Germany. We didn't tell German Americans, if you don't immediately leave Germany, you will lose your citizenship. Even with the Japanese, with the internment camps, I don't think they actually took that step of, telegramming these people, if you don't immediately leave Japan, you'll lose your citizenship. I do not, to my knowledge, think we even went that far with them. So I think for us, it's very insignificant, especially since this went completely under the radar. There's, you mentioned my blog is the first place you'd seen it, and that in of itself shows there wasn't this huge media outcry about it. The ACLU didn't make a huge stink about it. None of these civil rights groups really apparently had anything to say about that. And if you put, and really it's just another logical step. I mean, if you're at this point where even just your opinion is enough to get you decoupled from your bank accounts, from all of those essential services that you need to even pay your bills. And now your citizenship's also on the line. Just through again, I have to remind people, these aren't government contractors. These are not people in any way associated with the government or with security clearances, any kind of just private citizens who were offered a job in China and traveled to China or worked with China.
Yeah, it is an under the radar story. So it was effective. So the news is reporting that many Westerners have resigned.
Well, that's what those news stories saw, and I don't blame them. I mean, if you're an American, if you're a dual citizen, or you're just an American citizen who is a resident in China for this job, I mean, the risk. I mean, threatening someone with statelessness is a very serious threat.
Mm-hmm.
People know, and most people are not going to take that risk with, especially if you're valuable, if you're one of those trades where you're in high demand. Even if you're getting a good salary in China, it's not worth the risk of becoming stateless.
I just wanted to add that about FDR during World War II, he he did. I hesitate to mention this because I can't remember all the names, but he did hesitate. I mean, he did institute a branch of his government that went after people who were still had contracts with Germany. And he one of the people he went after was Prescott Bush, because Prescott Bush would not stop doing business with the Nazi Germany. And but I don't know that it contained a threat to strip people of their citizenship, and it certainly had a process. I can't remember what it was called, some administration within, and I keep thinking of Arthur Goldberg, who became Supreme Court justice, but I'm as heading it, but I'm not certain of that. I'm sorry, but I thought I'd just interject.
Yeah, and I mean, and it was a different situation. Like, we were actually declared war.
Yes.
And I mean, so it wouldn't be that unexpected. But yeah, no, I trust that that's accurate history, Carlo. And you were talking before the show about, we're doing all these sanctions on individuals of other countries. So individual, Russian politicians or Russian businessmen, individual Chinese people. And you're saying it's just a matter of time, probably, before they start sanctioning individual U.S. citizens the same way, taking all their money, like you said, giving it to Zelensky. That could definitely be coming, and this is kind of a step closer towards that, because we're essentially threatening, these U.S. citizens without any reason or justification that they have to in their employment. If we want to declare war on China, then let's go ahead and tell U.S. citizens they got to leave. But short of that, it seems entirely unlawful. It seems unlawful.
Yeah.
But very interesting. So what else? There's so much. You're in Moscow, you mentioned, Ian, and in the West, we hear about how Russians are very unhappy with their government, and they're very unhappy with the decision to attempt to, in lack of a better term, invade Ukraine and engage in this military conflict. Those of us who really don't spend a lot of time with the mainstream Western media, we know better. We know, we watch alternative media sources, and we hear that, if they're mad at Putin, they're mad at him for not being more aggressive. Is that kind of your basic understanding of public opinion? I mean, do you have a good handle? And honestly, I would think Moscow is the most liberal and pro-Western area of Russia. I would think, but again, I'd like to hear your opinion, because you're actually there on the ground. So, what are your thoughts after living there? You said since last year, December
was the first time, and I was there for a month. And then, so I've been here on and off for about, I guess, almost a year now. It's kind of a complicated issue, because it's a whole country full of people, and like you said, there is that split between urban and more rural areas. Your big cities, particularly your two traditional capital cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg, I would say, just based on the places I've seen so far, that's almost certainly a true statement. It is more liberal, more internationalist than, say, you go further out away from Moscow, you get more into provincial Russia. You'll get more people are less interested in that. And maybe even more traditional and conservative too. I'd say it's actually very similar to probably almost any other country. The USA or Europe, you talk to people in the cities, you'll get a different response than people out in the boondocks, if you will. And our perception of Russia is very interesting. It's like, I call it kind of like Schrodinger's cat, because we have these contradictory opinions about Russia, these perceptions that contradict each other, and we hold them at the same time. So Russians are brainwashed slaves of Putin, but they are also about to rebel. So it's like, well, okay, which is it? Are they free thinkers who are about to rebel, or are they brainwashed? I mean, you can't be both. We also have, and also in strength, power dynamics too. So Russia is so weak and dumb. They're, we don't even need to worry about them. They can't even beat tiny little Ukraine. But at the same time, if we don't stop them in Ukraine, they'll take over the whole world. They'll take over all of, so it's like, then the weapons, Russian weapons and Soviet weapons are terrible. They suck unless they're used by the Ukrainians, and they're great. Then they work perfectly. We have these contradictory beliefs about them, and it's almost like looking into a mirror and just like, you're getting all of your opinions about some other completely different person just from staring into the mirror and just basing on what you see in your imagination. Really, it's projection and just an image that you created yourself. It really is. So it's like this perpetual self-feeding loop of disinformation of our own making, and it's a caricature of a person. It's very little relation to the real thing. But to answer your question about what their opinions are, I would say it's mixed. I mean, you ask people, because I'll make friends with people, and I'll ask them, what do you think of the current situation? What do you think of the war? What do you think of the government? And you'll get mixed answers. So I will say this perception that everybody is scared to give their real opinion is not true. You'll often get very critical opinions. You'll get very anti-war opinions sometimes. It's actually, I would say, it's like trying to gauge Americans' opinions of, say, the Iraq War or the Afghanistan War. It's actually more difficult than it's not even black and white. So a lot of people, I think almost everybody, yes, every country has those few pro-war people who are just very aggressive and belligerent. That's a very small minority. I'd say the vast majority of, just from people I've talked to here, are very unhappy about the war. They're actually very upset about it. And we also have to remember that Ukrainians and Russians are effectively the same people. So, extended and even immediate families on both sides of the border.
Why would you want to erase Ukrainian identity, Ian? How dare you, sir? I'm just
right.
So yeah, when you call them one people, when they essentially are, of course, Ukrainians are going to push back and say, no, we are a distinct cultural, language, identity people, but not really. I'm sorry to interrupt you. So
no, you're good. So I think you're right in that I would say what's happening right now is a very moderate approach. I do think Putin and the people around him have a very moderate, even globalist approach. They want to stay coupled with the West. They want to repair relations with the West. They want those economic and cultural and social connections and communication with Western Europe. We've never seen any kind of opposition like to the European Union. As far as I can tell, Russia actually, for all intents and purposes, wants to be a part of not literally in the European Union, but they want that pan-German Russian connection, because that really makes sense. If they actually got their acts together and you had Germany and Russia on the same team, actually properly economically integrated with each other, actually economically investing in each other, no strings attached, you would have easily the greatest superpower in the world. It's just, you have that vast Eurasian geographic territory with natural resources, with a large population. The parts of Russia that are underdeveloped and are still stagnant, would benefit from actual, proper, honest European investment and buying Russian energy, buying Russian resources, trading with Russia. That would be of complete benefit. And the dirty little secret here, which I think people don't hit on enough, is that if you trade with someone, if you just talking and socializing and trading with someone reduces the odds of conflict. When you isolating someone increases the chances of the war, does not decrease it. It does the opposite.
And as we've mentioned on this show a number of times, that's one of the goals of this current setup of Ukraine, and that is to destabilize Europe and specifically Germany. And this is explicitly mentioned in the by the Project for the New American Century in their 1993 report. They go out of their way to say one of the goals we have is to weaken the EU, because the EU, as a conglomerate together, can easily become, well, not easily, but can become a more powerful economic force in the United States. So one of their intentions that's being accomplished now is the destabilization of Europe, which they've intended to do now for I don't know, actually since the end of World War II with the Marshall Plan. I mean, you can say anything you want about the Marshall Plan, but what it was, and Bretton Woods, but what it was set up to do was to make the United States the sole number one power in perpetuity after they took out the Soviet Union. Then you have, of course, the nuclear arms race, which Robert Lovett, who was a member of the Truman administration, amply pointed out, and that if we can sell the American people on this bullshit of something you tossed out, we could certainly sell them this bullshit of a Cold War. They're very explicit about that. The whole Cold War was contrived to allow the arms industry to develop and grow rich. And then you end up with Eisenhower's statement as he leaves office, that you've got to beware of this thing, which was allowed to fester virtually right after World War I. In fact, fester during the Manhattan Project. So it's been an idea of the United States to keep a leash on Europe. And when the EU was conceived, that's why there was so much hostility from U.S. punditry and U.S. Institutions to prevent that from happening. But
the first chairman of NATO, and I forget his name, but he's got a quote. It's from the late 40s. It's NATO's job is to keep Russia out, the U.S. in, and Germany down. So regarding Europe, that's NATO's job. And I mean, it's always been NATO, wanting to further those basic interests, and it's the interests of the United States. That's what's best for the United States, not for the working class of the United States, but for the capitalist class. So, I mean, it's important for me to point out that there's no such thing as a national interest. Nations are divided between interests, between the capitalist elite minority and then the working class majority. And typically when the news talks about the nation's interest, they're talking about the interest of the capitalist class, which is a very small minority of the country. If we're talking working class interest, it's always peace, mutual prosperity, development. But again, those things are the opposite of what's in the interest of the capitalist class, which is often war, exploiting markets, exploiting resources, exploiting the workers. So, so Ian was explaining how, if the actual interests of the German people and the Russian people, not the capitalist class of the United States, not the capitalist class of even Germany, well, maybe the capitalists in Germany would benefit from a united. So Merkel saw that, right? Merkel saw that it's in the best interest of Germany to, build these pipelines, develop economic ties. And that is one of the reasons why Nord Stream 1 and 2 was destroyed, because it represented this integration, this European integration with Russia and the EU. And so by destroying those pipelines, it kind of limited what is possible in the short term, for sure, as far as diplomacy and as far as getting past the conflict. And so it definitely was another escalation. And but what are your thoughts about that, Ian? I mean, Merkel, I think, kind of had that same vision of that you just described, where the Germany and Russia, working together can create an economic bloc that's extremely powerful, and that threatened, Western U.S. hegemonic interests.
Well,
we'll get back to that after the break. We're going to take a brief break.
Take a break.
And we'll get right back to that question. Thanks for asking that, Billy Bob. America Open Market. AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free multilingual borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales, orders, and customers is available. You get paid directly, securely, and instantly on the America Open Market. You can sell your house, car, electronic laptop, CD player, boombox, phone, headphones, furniture, and clothing, and anything on AmericaOpenMarket.com where all your sales and customer needs are met. Register as a merchant today. You will not regret becoming a vendor at America Open Market. For further inquiries, contact us at aomarket@gmail.com. AO Market, best digital marketplace for humanity. Welcome back to the Foreign Policy Review, and I'm Dustin Pickering. Today we have Ian Cummer with us. We're going to just continue along the lines of inquiry that Billy Bob introduced just prior to the break about Germany and Russia. So let's get back to that question. Ian, go ahead.
Well, so just to recap on that, you mentioned if she's interested in forming a more coherent economic bloc with Russia, I would say yes. But also, I mean, she's a girl who grew up in East Germany. She was a small girl. Might just be more of an emotional connection too. I mean, she's not someone who was subjected to the Soviet Union was bad. The Warsaw Pact was bad. I mean, she grew up in it. And I have seen that too, even just the Germans I met here. I mean, there is, I still think even now after reunification, there's that East-West split. And you can actually just kind of see that from the conversations you have with people and just their attitudes in general. Talking to German people, you can kind of see that split, who grew up on which side of the Iron Curtain. And so with Merkel, and I even remember when she was still, before she retired, she would say a lot of things that rubbed me the wrong way. But I think now when we look back and we see what happened after she left, I think we can kind of understand the amount of pressure she was under. And we saw this immediately after she left. Germany basically took the suicide pill. I mean, and that didn't happen by coincidence. I think you have a lot of people in Germany who've been wanting to take that suicide pill for a long time, and she was just kind of having to straddle the fence and placate those people. But now that she's out of the way, they can take that suicide pill and decouple Germany from Russia, deindustrialize Germany, have them eating bugs, which is, I don't know why the European Union loves bugs so much, but it seems like every opportunity to say, guys, there's these bugs. We don't need cows. We don't need pigs. We have bugs.
They own stock. They own stock in the bug companies.
Maybe.
They
just really hate bugs. They just really hate bugs.
If I had my old apartments back, we could eat roaches for years. I just wanted to clarify that statement I made earlier. Prescott Bush was a director at the Union Bank Corporation when its assets were frozen under the Trading with Enemy Act in 1941, a fact that has provided endless fodder for leftists and conspiracy theorists since it came to light in the 1990s. I have to laugh at that latter comment because I was one of the leftists and conspiracy theorists that went to the National Archives and ferreted out the documents for the Texas Observer back in the 1990s, actually. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify.
It's amazing that was hidden until the 90s. You know, his dealings with the Nazis, but. Yeah, I mean, essentially, the West really was wanting the Nazis to invade and destroy the Soviet Union. That was the big hope. That's why all the Western capitalists built up the Nazi war machine.
That's why the bomb was built.
Well,
not only was the bomb built to serve as an example to the Soviets, but
Yeah.
it was also built so that there would be decades of profits by the companies like Westinghouse and Eastman well, to go out of my head, the I think it was Westinghouse in a meeting. I don't want to get too far off, but they had 15. They bragged that they had 1,500 um, 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 outsourced corporations helping to build the bomb. It was a huge boon to them. So that's why the bomb was built. But let's get back on course here. I'm sorry.
All right, so where were we? About, we were talking about Germany, about Merkel, about Ukraine. I guess that's kind of the central issue tying those things together, or the spark, if you will, or the trigger point. So yeah, okay, does that make sense so far? All right, Billy, Bob,
Yeah,
what do you think?
you know, I'm curious, you know, what your thoughts are about how this might play out and why. To me, it seems like a new Cold War is definitely taking shape. And I think ultimately, as I said at the beginning, you know, it's the Western unipolar hegemony is under threat from multipolarism and from, you know, an ascendant Russia and China. So they're trying to weaken and subvert Russia and China to maintain Western unipolar hegemony throughout the rest of the 21st century. That's what's going on. Personally, I don't think that, you know, the West has a chance of maintaining its current, you know, sphere of wealth, power, and privilege. I think that it's inevitable that, you know, they're going to be usurped by Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela. These countries are going to, you know, continue to develop and displace Western global hegemony. But how is the West going to respond to that? What's the, you know, what are your thoughts on how, or even if you don't agree with any of what I said, let me know. But I mean, basically, it seems straightforward. Like, the West is going to fight that kicking and screaming. At some point, they're going to have to, you know, understand the reality, or they're going to just destroy the planet. Which do you think which way do you think they're going to go? Sorry, that's a tough one.
Well, it is, but I would say the West, this idea. I mean, and this is a label that this isn't a label that conspiracy theorists came up with. You know, you're not a conspiracy theorist for referring to the West. I mean, it's a label that has become very mainstream. Even, you know, CNN and BBC will say the West this, the West that, the West and the rules-based order. They love that now. And I remember, apparently you don't need to be very old to remember when everyone was telling you that, you know, the deep state and the new world order is a conspiracy theory. It's not real. And now you have Biden, you have the news, everybody talking about the world order. Well, I thought the world order was a conspiracy. We transitioned very quickly. But to answer your question about what is going to happen, well, the problem with this war is that I think every step of it has taken everybody by surprise, and by everybody, I mean everybody on both sides. You know, prior to February 24 this year, I think everybody was just incredulous that this civil conflict happening in Ukraine would turn into a war between Ukraine and Russia and NATO. I think it's just, you know, myself included, I think people just did not believe it would come to that. And I'm not the only one saying that. Even Americans who were in Ukraine, in Kyiv, would do live streams. And, you know, this is an opinion I saw over and over. There's just like, you know, it would be a brother war. It would be a civil war. You know, it's just, people were incredulous that was even possible. And then when Russia recognized the independence, you know, took that big step of just basically abandoning the Minsk agreement, completely giving up on the Minsk agreements that had been just sitting there unfulfilled for 8 years, recognizing the independence of those two breakaway regions. I think even then, no one imagined it would turn into an 8-month war with a six-figure death toll. I don't think really anyone predicted that either. I mean, myself included. It would just be a few days, maybe a few weeks at most, of some kind of scuffle, and then there would be negotiations and a new agreement, and that would be the end of it. No one imagined it would turn into this very bloody, very intense conventional warfare between these two groups of people. I don't think anyone expected that. And I know our intelligence community tried to say, well, that's what we're saying. We were predicting it all along. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, but making the same prediction every day for a year until it just by coincidence happens is not a useful prediction. Because they're just saying, Russia's going to invade today. Russia's going to invade today. They're just saying that every day until by coincidence it happened, and also make it even less of a impressive prediction. It wasn't really a prediction at all, because we know that there were larger offensives, there were larger shellings. It was a deliberate provocation to try and get an escalation in Donbass. We know that. That's confirmed fact. I mean, you had 60,000 Ukrainian troops built up there. They were increasing the shellings. But even then, nobody in NATO expected a Russian response on anywhere the scale that it happened. That did catch everybody by surprise.
That brings me to the logical question of, I feel the same way about the nuclear threat that you're expressing about the conventional threat. What do you feel about the fact that my complacency about the nuclear threat may be misplaced? I mean, that's been bandied about, and that's where the continuity is between the old Cold War and the new Cold War is in the nuclear threat.
Well, we've built this mythology around ourselves, a very popular mythology that nuclear weapons are a deterrent, that they're actually a good thing, because, and this is a very common belief, that, because when you have, whether it's India and Pakistan, or it's the USA and Soviet Union, or China or Russia, both sides are so afraid of mutually assured destruction, they won't go to war with each other. So there's an assurance of peace, because no one's going to escalate to the point where, well, and again, I think there's less and less evidence that's true. And there's not even one instance in history of nuclear weapons preventing a war. The first day we invented them, we immediately used them on someone. So we didn't tell Japan, hey, surrender, or we didn't nuke an empty island and tell Japan this will be you. We didn't threaten. We just used it on them. We used it on them twice.
We didn't go the Leo Szilard route. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. And also in the same war with Operational Unthinkable, when British intelligence were considering the option of, should we, once we finish with Nazi Germany, should we use that as a stepping stone into also invading the Soviet Union? Again, nukes were not a deterrent. It was just, at that time, it was still in its infancy, and nukes were not enough of a weapon that would have changed the course of the war. You still had to use conventional bombers. They were still small warheads. They were not enough to turn the tide of, they were not a significant enough advantage at the time. And then moving on into the Cold War, there was never at any point where nuclear weapons prevented, there's not a single proxy war or conflict in that period that we can sit there and say nuclear weapons prevented this from being worse. Not even one. It was always, what actually prevented it was that it was just those countries had an economic and military strength. That's what prevented. Because if there was ever at any point where the USA and NATO felt that we were stronger than Soviet Union, they would have done something. But it was the fact they maintained a large enough military that conventional threat was enough. I don't think adding another, because there was already an arms race in conventional weapons, adding another arms race with nuclear weapons just added another arms race. It didn't bring peace. It's added another arms race. And I think the problem is also excuse me. nuclear war has been imminent for a long time. And it's just kind of like the boy who called wolf. We've had 50, 60 years of being told over and over again nuclear war could happen at any minute. People stopped believing it. And you're at this point now. I would say we're actually in a position that's worse than even in the Cuban Missile Crisis, because for one, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had Kennedy, you had rational statesmen at the helm who were smart enough to stop it from escalating past a certain point. Now we have people who are very old and can barely string a coherent sentence together. Biden it's actually scary because
Not you, Carlo, Biden.
No, it could be me.
Well, no, I think Biden is someone, because there was a period in my life where I was actually hospitalized for several months, and I was very medicated. And talking to me in this period, I would talk in circles. I would forget what I was saying, and that's like listening to Biden. It actually hurts a little to watch him because I know exactly the feeling where he's in this brain fog. And you can tell, I am sure they have him on some stimulants. They have something, because you can tell some days he's good, some days he's okay. That's stimulants. Because the problem with drugs is that they don't give you consistency. So some days he's good, he's okay, his medications are working, he seems like a coherent, awake person. And there's days where he's just a mess and he doesn't remember who the president is. He calls Kamala the president, which is scary.
But he has people around him who are, atrocious
yes and no.
people, but people around him.
Well, Lloyd Austin is not, he's possibly one of the most unqualified defense secretaries we've ever had. He's not at all fit for the job. We have Blinken, who has benefited from nepotism his whole life. It's not good. So I think what really makes now dangerous is because we've had this war, and I wouldn't even call it a Cold War at this point. That is where I disagree. It's just a war at this point. It's just a war. It's not even a Cold War. It's a hybrid war. So we're not throwing nukes at each other yet, but we're using hybrid warfare. So there are all those economic and cyber weapons and military conventional weapons are being used right now. So it's just a war. And the problem is, I think we're at this point where neither side knows what's going on, where we've gone beyond the contingency plans that both sides had. Because at the beginning, both sides knew what they wanted. So Russia wanted to demilitarize Ukraine, and they wanted secure borders. That's what they wanted, and that's what they still want. And NATO wanted Russia to be dissolved. They wanted Russia to be destroyed and completely eliminated as a nation altogether. But as time has gone on, we're past I don't think anyone on either, I really think all of the evidence points to no one on either side thought would go on for this long.
So how is it on the ground in Moscow then? When you go out to a restaurant, because when I was in Moscow during Perestroika, there was nothing. You went to a restaurant and they said, we have cucumbers and tomatoes. Okay, fine. Not okay. But and how is it now? So
it's definitely a lot better now. I would say you have the shopping malls that anyone in the USA or Europe would be familiar with. It's that same. You'd have your big shopping malls. You have your strip malls. They have those Slavic style open. I still really love those open air markets. So you'll often have shopping malls surrounded by open air markets, which you'll see in any Slavic country, really. They like those open air markets. You'll have big shopping malls, open air markets, movie theater. You'll have so those Perestroika and 1990s days are of constant shortages and inefficient shopping arrangements essentially are over. And I've even had other expats and visitors come here who had been here in the 90s and early 2000s say, it's night and day different than it is now. And of course, people who live here also tell me that.
Which is probably one of the reasons Putin is pretty popular, because the quality of life for the average Russian has probably improved tremendously since, the drunk Yeltsin destroyed their economy by just rubber stamping the Chicago boys' economic policies. So no, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about nuclear holocaust. Perhaps I'm naive in that way. I mean, there's nothing I can really do about it. So I mean, I'm optimistic, but perhaps perhaps that optimism is naive. But I think there's an alternative, right? I don't think that the West wants to destroy itself. They're happy to destroy the rest of the world in furtherance of their interests, and they would do that at the drop of a dime. But they can't do that without destroying themselves. And I don't think they're suicidal. I think they'll settle for the best deal that they can get. And I think we have adults in the room. I think Putin is an adult. I think Xi in China is an adult. And I think they can manage this inevitable Western decline. I think they can manage this Western decline in a way that doesn't, end in the extinction of the human race or, a nuclear holocaust. So I'm optimistic. Again, I might be misguided and naive to think that the U.S. is not suicidal, but I don't believe that. I don't believe that. What are your thoughts? I mean, about China. Like, I mean, Russia. We're at war. It's a proxy war with Russia. We're fighting in Ukraine. I guess there's U.S. servicemen on the ground. Was recently announced. They're actually inspecting the weapons to make sure the weapons are killing Russians, and not going to being sold to Russia or ending up in some other extremist, the highest bidder kind of thing. So there's actually U.S. troops on the ground. It's officially acknowledged. They're doing spot checks of the weapons depots in Ukraine. So to me, that's another little bit of an escalation, because what happens if the Russia destroys one of these ammo depots and kills some of these U.S. troop inspectors? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, and so that's I'll hit the China one for your China question first, and that's not. It's a tricky one, and it's not a subject I know a lot about, but there are a lot of China, because I am also taking some Russian classes here in Moscow, and there are quite a few Chinese students there. So it's very hard, and I will say that China is just as mysterious to Russians as it is to us. China is a kind of a mysterious, somewhat isolationist country, so Russians don't understand them any more than we do, apparently. But I will say the fact that China really has not picked a side in this does suggest that some weakness, that there's some codependency between them and us. They know, like what we just did to Russia with the sanctions packages that we slapped on them. I doubt China would have survived it, because ultimately Russia is a net exporter of food and resources and energy. They are self-contained. They can be put under siege and survive it, but China is a net importer, and even while still importing Russian goods, I don't think they could survive being decoupled from the West like Russia has. And I think it's very apparent in the fact that we antagonize them so often, with Ukraine saying, why is China not taking a harder stance? Why? And we're using Taiwan as this wedge against them. I think the fact they haven't done anything more decisive about it suggests that maybe they can't. That's possible. Now, with your second question, I'm going to be honest, I actually forgot what your second question was.
Well, there's U.S. troops,
yes,
officially acknowledged being in Ukraine, making sure the weapons are being used for the right purposes, which could be an additional, flashpoint.
I think it could be considered an escalation. It's not as big of an escalation as it might be interpreted to be, because there have been CIA and special forces people on the ground since the beginning. They never left. They were just there. And I think because I've read, because the Russian news was hostile to it. Of course, they do treat it as an escalation, but I think the Russian MOD probably doesn't care or actually likes the idea. And the reason why is because these are, again, weapons inspectors. They don't have weapons in their hands. They're not adding anything to the fight.
Right.
And also from Russia's perspective, they do not benefit from Ukrainian weapons spilling all over the place, because the most logical place to smuggle Ukrainian weapons is Russia. It is. You could send guns to organized crime in Russia. So it's actually better if there's American inspectors there, making sure, because if they're funneled into Ukrainian troops and sent to the front, that's not good for Russia, but it's better than those weapons scattering everywhere, scattering to Finland, scattering to Poland, scattering to Bulgaria, Moldova, Russia. From their point of view, those soldiers there, those doing inspections, are fine. That's my guess. That's probably what internally they're saying too.
And anybody who wants to pursue that further, Douglas Valentine in the CIA's Organized Crime, he discusses the CIA 75-year association with Ukrainian nationalists, better known as Bandera fascists. So you can read up on how long the CIA has been training people to destabilize the Soviet Union first and now Russia. 75 years, ever since World War II, basically. Before, when they were the OSS, they were doing it. That's when they began. So, and Doug Valentine's very good on that topic. He can be a little acerbic, but it's very good.
And the U.S. or Russia has known that the U.S. has had troops on the ground the whole time. Just because the U.S. is finally officially acknowledging it doesn't change any of that. I mean, they've been there the whole time, special ops. So, Ian, we really appreciate you coming on. I know it's probably a tough platform because you got me coming at you, then Carlos coming at you, and then Dustin. He's always there about to say something, and then he doesn't. But no, you've done a really great job of answering our questions and sharing your perspective. I'm sure we can have you back. Is there anything else you would like to discuss? I think we have a couple minutes left. Anything that we didn't miss or that we missed and that you thought about discussing and we didn't?
I would say to close, and I have written about this before. I do think this, the referendum to bring on 4 new territories from Ukraine to Russia shows there's a new phase of the war, and it also it started the same way the previous ones did. Because even if you look at American military doctrine, you have, in the course of a military operation, different phases. You shape the battlefield before you even enter it. You dominate the battlefield. You stabilize, and you shape it again. So those are some of the steps. So you can kind of also see that with the Russians are doing, they come on to the, they try to shape it to their advantage before they do something. They try to dominate a space as quickly and as completely as they can, and then they have this de-escalation where they try to basically reduce the conflict as much as possible and bring that area back to a normal life as much as possible. And part of that is also what they've done every time is shrink their footprint. So in April, they left Kyiv altogether because the point of Kyiv was try to bring Ukraine to the negotiating table, which actually did work, but Kyiv just abandoned the deal at the last minute. However, they still left the Kyiv Oblast and concentrated their forces in Donbass. And again, we're seeing that again. They added, except this time the deal they're offering is less generous than it was in February. The longer you put off a deal, the less generous it gets for you. So this time, rather than lose 2 territories, Ukraine's looking to lose 4. And of course, Russia abandons the Kharkiv and the territories that just weren't part of those 4, consolidating around those 4. But yes, thank you for having me on. And it'd be great to continue this conversation later. But no, thank you very much.
An hour is not enough time.
No, it's not.
Thanks for
So-
joining us, Ian. Go
Stay
ahead.
after the show. We're going to do our commercial break, and then stay after the show. We'll talk some more.
Sounds good.
Thanks for watching the Foreign Policy Review. Go back and watch from the beginning if you missed anything, and it was an interesting discussion. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Remember, we are here smoking pot and doing all kinds of crazy that gets us in a lot of trouble. So please continue to watch our station at Parrot TV. You know,
We're not smoking pot. Okay, we're
Hey,
smoking.
speak for yourself.
We are and we aren't. Yeah, speak for myself. I disappear at times. See, I'm kind of here and there, here and gone. But thanks for watching, guys. You viewers out there, let's make this show possible and great. So please continue to view and continue to watch and share our content. And definitely come back and watch again next week, Thursday, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And we will have an excellent discussion then. And we had a guy say hello to us. So here he is. Thank you. Hello back.
Hi, Dust.
And have an excellent afternoon, guys. You just go out there and do some reading and some research and enjoy your day. Thank you.